You already know how this feels. Not the dramatic version, not the crisis version, the quiet one. The one where the day ends and you cannot account for where it went. Where the week closes and the distance between where you are and where you intended to be is exactly the same as it was last January. That is not a motivation problem. That is a structural problem, and it has a precise solution. 2026 began the same way 2025 did for most people. With intention. With a list. With the specific private energy of a clean calendar and an unbroken streak. And then, on schedule, the friction of real life made contact with the architecture of good intentions, and the intentions lost. Not because you are weak, not because you do not want it badly enough, because intentions without structural design are not a plan, they are a wish. There is a specific quality to the wasted year that is different from the failed year. The failed year had attempts, evidence of effort, friction that at least confirmed you were moving against something. The wasted year is quieter than that. It is the year where the days were consumed, not by disaster, not by crisis, but by the default operating system running its program, while your actual life waited in the background. That is what a wasted year actually is, not laziness, defaulting. You are not behind because you lack discipline. You are not stagnant because you are incapable. You have been operating inside an environment that was architected, deliberately and with extraordinary precision, to consume your attention, your time, and your cognitive bandwidth, before you ever redirect them toward what you actually chose. You are not losing to yourself. You are losing to a system. And that distinction matters, because systems can be redesigned. Characters cannot be rebuilt on a schedule. Systems can. The window is the next 24 hours. Not next Monday. Not after the project closes. Not when conditions feel more aligned. The behavioral science on this is unambiguous. The moment of intention carries the highest probability of execution and degrades measurably with every hour of delay. The next 24 hours are not symbolic. They are a structural inflection point. What you install today either compounds forward, or the default reclaims the architecture by tomorrow morning. The conventional advice will tell you to overhaul everything. New routine, new goals, new system, new you. That advice has a consistent failure rate because it ignores the neuroscience of behavioral installation. The prefrontal cortex, your executive control center, cannot manage simultaneous high-load recalibration across multiple behavioral domains. It is not a character limitation. It is an anatomical one. Attempting everything simultaneously guarantees the system reverts to default every time. Time is the only non-renewable structural resource in this equation. Every other variable, money, energy, skill, connection, can be rebuilt, recovered, accumulated, or replaced. Time spent inside the default operating system does not produce a refund. It does not produce a lesson automatically. It produces only what it always produces. More of the same trajectory, compounding quietly in a direction you did not choose. The architecture of a reclaimed life begins with treating time as the finite structural input it actually is. What you are about to receive is not a motivational framework. It is not a productivity aesthetic. It is not a system designed for optimal conditions. It is a precise, sequenced blueprint of 6 executable actions that can be installed inside the next 24 hours, in a real life, with real friction, with a real nervous system that has been running on default longer than it should have. Each action is designed to compound. None of them require exceptional resources. All of them require only the decision to begin. The core thesis is this: You do not need a year to change your trajectory. You need 24 hours of deliberate architectural installation. The compound effect does not care how long you have been drifting. It responds only to direction. The moment you establish a directional default, even a small one, even imperfectly, the trajectory begins to deviate from the path it was on. Small deviations compounded over months become unrecognizable distances from the original heading. That is the mechanism. That is what the next 24 hours are for. Step 1. Write one sentence tonight. 1. Not a list. Not a vision board. Not a goal framework with categories and sub-priorities. One sentence that completes this structure. Tomorrow I will complete, and then one specific, concrete, completable action. The trap is ambition. The trap is writing something that sounds significant, but has no defined completion point. Work on my project is not a sentence. Write the first 300 words of Section 2 is a sentence. Specificity is what converts intention into executable architecture. The deep reframe is this. Your brain does not act on vague directives. The reticular activating system, the neural filter that determines what your brain prioritizes and pursues, requires a concrete, specific target to activate approach behavior. A vague intention produces a vague neurological response. A precise written directive produces a measurably different one. The act of writing it by hand activates encoding in multiple neural regions simultaneously. The benefit is immediate. Tomorrow begins with direction already installed before the day has a chance to impose its own agenda. Step 2. Set the phone outside the bedroom tonight. Not on silent, not face down, outside the room. The trap is the belief that you have sufficient willpower to not pick it up when it is within reach and your executive control is at its lowest, which is exactly what the first and last minutes of your day are. Sleep research documents this consistently. Phone proximity at waking increases screen engagement within 60 seconds, in the overwhelming majority of users. This is not a discipline failure, it is proximity architecture operating exactly as designed. The reframe is behavioral, not moral. The first neurological input of your day sets the baseline processing mode for the prefrontal cortex in the hours that follow. High stimulus reactive input in the first minutes of waking activates the limbic system, the reactive, threat-scanning, emotionally driven processing mode. Low stimulus, self-directed input activates the prefrontal executive mode. These two modes have different cognitive outputs for the entire day. The phone outside the bedroom is not a sacrifice. It is the single highest leverage environmental adjustment available to you tonight for zero cost. Step 3. Eliminate one open loop before midnight. An open loop is any incomplete commitment that occupies background cognitive processing. The email you have been meaning to send, the bill you have been meaning to address, the conversation you have been avoiding, the task you have written on 3 consecutive to-do lists without executing. Open loops are not passive. They consume active cognitive bandwidth even when you are not consciously thinking about them. Research on the Zeigarnik effect confirms this. The brain allocates processing resources to incomplete tasks until they are either completed or deliberately closed. The trap is attempting to close all of them at once. Do not. The architecture is precise. Identify the single open loop that has occupied the most background bandwidth and close it tonight. Send the email. Make the call. Pay the bill. Write the 2 sentences. The benefit is neurological and immediate. Closed loops release the cognitive resources that were allocated to them. You will wake tomorrow with measurably more available executive bandwidth than you went to bed with tonight. That is a structural gain that requires no exceptional effort, only the decision to close one thing. Step 4. Design a 20-minute morning window with no incoming information. Not a meditation practice. Not a journaling protocol. Not a wellness routine requiring discipline you may not yet have. 20 minutes in which you do not consume anything that originated outside your own mind. No social feed, no news, no podcast, no group chat, no email. The trap is filling those 20 minutes with something that feels productive, but is still externally directed, consuming other people's priorities before establishing your own. The mechanism is dopamine baseline recalibration. The brain's reward sensitivity, its capacity to register the ordinary returns of disciplined work as meaningful, is directly correlated with the stimulation level of its baseline inputs. High-stimulus early morning environments elevate the baseline. Low-stimulus protected windows recalibrate it downward over days. When the baseline drops, ordinary progress begins to register as reward again. The friction between intention and execution, that gap you have been trying to close with motivation, begins to narrow structurally. Not because you are trying harder, because the instrument taking the measurement has been recalibrated. The trap is believing that the urgent incoming item cannot wait 45 minutes while you execute your one task. In almost every professional context, it can. The deep reframe is this: you are not choosing to ignore the world for 45 minutes. You are choosing to give the single most important output of your day the cognitive conditions it requires to exist. A task executed first, with full prefrontal bandwidth, produces a categorically different output than the same task executed third after 2 hours of reactive processing. Sequence is architecture. Architecture determines output. Output determines trajectory. The trap is believing that the urgent incoming item cannot wait 45 minutes while you execute your one task. In almost every professional context, it can. The deep reframe is this: you are not choosing to ignore the world for 45 minutes. You are choosing to give the single most important output of your day the cognitive conditions it requires to exist. A task executed first with full prefrontal bandwidth produces a categorically different output than the same task executed third after 2 hours of reactive processing. Sequence is architecture. Architecture determines output. Output determines trajectory. Step 6. Hydrate before caffeine. Move before stimulus. This sounds like wellness advice. It is structural neuroscience. Cortisol, the body's primary stress and alertness hormone, peaks naturally in the first 90 minutes after waking. Introducing caffeine during this window interferes with that natural cortisol regulation and blunts the alertness architecture the body is already constructing. Introducing physical movement during this window amplifies it. 10 minutes of deliberate movement before your first coffee is not a sacrifice. It is a neurochemical upgrade to the operating system you are about to run all day. The trap is treating hydration and movement as prerequisites that require energy you may not have in the morning. They do not require energy, they generate it. The body is mildly dehydrated after 6 to 8 hours without water. Even mild dehydration measurably impairs cognitive performance, specifically in the domains of executive function and working memory. The first glass of water is not a wellness ritual. It is maintenance on the primary tool you are about to use for the entire day. The benefit is structural and costs nothing. A recovered, movement-primed, hydrated prefrontal cortex, executing the day's one task before the reactive world arrives. 6 steps. 1 sentence written tonight. Phone outside the bedroom. 1 open loop closed before midnight. 20 minutes of protected information silence in the morning. The single task executed before any reactive channel is opened. Hydration and 10 minutes of movement before caffeine. None of these require money. None require exceptional willpower. None require you to be a different person than you are tonight. They require only the decision to install a different architecture in the next 24 hours. The compound effect of these 6 steps does not announce itself in the first day. It will not announce itself loudly in the first week. This is where the architecture requires honest preparation. The nervous system will not produce dramatic evidence of change on a short timeline. The dopamine baseline will not recalibrate overnight. The open loops will not all close by Tuesday. What will change is the direction, and direction, compounded consistently, is the only variable that separates the trajectory you are on from the one you intended to be on. Install a closing ritual tonight and every night this week. 3 minutes. 1 question: did I execute my one task today? If yes, write tomorrow's one sentence. If no, write what structural variable caused the failure, not the emotional reason, the structural one, and adjust one element of tomorrow's architecture to remove it. You are not journaling for reflection. You are auditing for pattern. You are building a feedback loop into the system so that the same friction point does not win twice on the same terms. By day 3, the environment will push back. The default architecture does not yield without friction. The old operating system has years of reinforcement behind it. Deep, practiced behavioral pathways that activate automatically under stress, fatigue, and social pressure. You will have a morning where the one task feels impossible before it begins. You will have a night where the phone ends up back on the nightstand. You will have a day that closes with a sentence unwritten. This is not evidence that the system does not work. This is the lag, and the lag is part of the architecture. Between day 10 and day 21, the old default will make its most compelling case for return. It will arrive as exhaustion. It will arrive as pragmatism. It will arrive as the reasonable voice that says, one missed day does not matter. You can recalibrate next week. The conditions were not right today. That voice is not your wisdom. It is not your honest assessment of the situation. It is the old architecture executing its primary function, maintaining itself by any persuasive mechanism available. Name it for what it is, and execute the one task anyway. The people around you will respond to your recalibration in ways you should anticipate. When you protect your morning window, someone will call it antisocial. When you close your phone at 10 p.m., someone will interpret it as withdrawal. When you decline the low-value evening that costs 4 hours of recovery, someone will call you boring, rigid, changed in a way that makes them uncomfortable. None of that is your problem to solve. It is their operating system encountering yours and finding the defaults incompatible. In a culture whose entire commercial infrastructure depends on the default continuing to run, on your attention remaining fragmented, your time remaining unconsolidated, your cognitive bandwidth remaining available for harvest, choosing direction over default is not a personal preference. It is a structural act of resistance against a system that profits directly from your drift. The social friction is confirmation. When the environment resists the new architecture, it is because the new architecture is actually different from what was there before. Expect it. Prepare for it. Do not let it recalibrate your trajectory. Travel 12 months forward from tonight. Not a decade. Not an abstraction. 12 months. You executed the 6 steps tonight. Not perfectly. Not every single day. But directionally, consistently, with recalibration when the system failed. The person at that 12-month coordinate does not begin their mornings inside someone else's agenda. The first cognitive output of each day belongs to what they chose. The open loops have been closing, one at a time, for a year. The backlog of unfinished intention that was consuming background bandwidth has been systematically dismantled. The financial picture at that coordinate is not identical to tonight's. Not because of a dramatic event or an exceptional circumstance, but because 12 months of decisions made from a recovered, calibrated executive-first processing mode produce structurally different outcomes than 12 months of decisions made from a depleted, reactive, default-driven one. The compound effect of better quality daily decisions across 365 days is not incremental, it is architectural. The trajectory has visibly deviated, and trajectory deviation, once established and maintained, becomes exponentially harder to reverse. The body is not running on a cortisol deficit by 9 in the morning. The nervous system is not overstimulated before the first task begins. The mornings are not consumed by reactive processing before a single intentional output has been produced. The environment reflects the interior, ordered by design, not by accident, and there is something present at that coordinate that cannot be purchased and cannot be rushed. The specific, grounded confidence of a person who has watched themselves do what they said they would do, repeatedly, over time, without requiring conditions to be perfect. Here is the forgiving close. You will not execute all 6 steps perfectly tonight. You will not sustain them perfectly through the first month. Perfection is not the mechanism. Direction is the mechanism. Even 3 of the 6 steps, executed with imperfect consistency, will produce a measurably different trajectory than the default that was running before tonight. A ship with a heading, even moving slowly, even with occasional course corrections, arrives at a fundamentally different destination than a ship that is drifting. The heading is what matters, not the speed, not the consistency, the heading. This is not about hustle. 2026 does not require you to grind harder than 2025. It requires you to design better than 2025. The people who will look back on this year as the inflection point are not the ones with the most ambition or the most raw effort. They are the ones who stopped asking their willpower to carry a load it was never structurally designed to carry, and started installing the architecture. That makes the correct behavior the default behavior. Not hustle, not motivation, not wanting it badly enough. Architecture. Installed tonight, in the next 24 hours. The blueprint is complete. 1 sentence written tonight for tomorrow's single task. Phone outside the bedroom. 1 open loop closed before midnight. 20 minutes of protected morning silence. The task executed before any reactive channel is opened. Hydration and movement before caffeine. 6 structural inputs. 24 hours. The beginning of a compound trajectory that the default operating system, however long it has been running, cannot produce on its own. You now have the architecture. The only remaining variable is whether you execute the first step before this window closes. Comment, "I am starting tonight" below this video right now. Not after the next video. Not when you have reviewed the steps again. Right now, before the momentum of this moment dissipates. That comment is not performative. It is a micro-commitment. And micro-commitments activate the identity mechanism at the neurological level. They are the first behavioral data point the reticular activating system uses to begin constructing the new architecture. Then subscribe, because the next video in this series installs the 30-day compound layer on top of what you built tonight. The year changes in the next 24 hours, or it does not change at all. The decision is available to you right now.